Now, welcome to this webinar about how Addigy and CyberFOX redefine admin privileges. I'm Selena Ali. I'm a senior product manager here at Addigy. Addigy is a device management service specifically for Apple devices. We handle all of the mobile device management that you would need for Apple, and we come from a strong background of Apple expertise. And I'm joined by Bill.
Hello, I'm Bill Morgan. I'm the Director of Technical Sales Enablement over at CyberFOX. CyberFOX, if you haven't heard of us, is a cybersecurity software company founded by David Bellini, one of the former co-founders of ConnectWise. Probably heard that name out in the industry. And we do privilege access management, we do password management, we do some DNS filtering and a few other security tools. So I've been doing this about 25 years now. The beard color might give that away a little bit, but looking forward to hopefully giving you guys some really good information today about cybersecurity and Macs and a little bit of Windows too.
Great. So this is our agenda. I'm not going to go through and read all of this because we're going to talk about it. But if you want spoilers or some idea of what we're going to cover today, this is your chance. We will have a Q&A session. So if you could please use the Q&A to ask questions. There is at the bottom, you should see a specific Q&A thing. We are keeping an eye on the chat as well. We'll do the best we can to grab stuff from there, but if you could use Q&A. And if you want to make sure it's sent to everyone, that way we can all see the questions as we go along. But before we get started, I think we're going to have a poll about what percentage of your Mac users are currently running as admins. And that should be popping up now. So I'll give people a little bit of time, but it would really help us. And it's kind of a good curiosity for us to kind of get this started of what does your environment look like? How many people are admins? And while that's going, I'm gonna move on and pass it on to Bill.
So one of the things that I've always found helpful, and I have this conversation with a lot of IT professionals, whether you're in the MSP space or in the enterprise space, or education, is picking a framework to help you understand what it is that we should be doing. But another thing that I got this really great advice years ago from a guy was in an MSP, and he goes, I like using, in his case, he was using the CIS framework, right? So most of these are relatively similar. There's common elements throughout all of these, whether you're looking at CIS as a framework or you're in the UK and you're following Cyber Essentials, or Australia doing the Essential 8, or you're doing any kind of government stuff with CMMC. Um, they all have a core common competency when it comes to cybersecurity. And he said it very succinctly. He's like, there's so many practices, processes, and things that we need to do. And I don't necessarily understand or know how to identify the gaps in what I am doing versus what I'm not doing. So if you're not following a framework, is everybody kind of following a framework? Which kind of yeses and nos in the chats and stuff like that. Some people will be winging it. That's okay too while they're getting their strategy together. But ideally following a framework helps us to identify here's what we are doing, but also here's what I'm not doing. And that's what can really help us fill the gaps in and kind of avoid us missing coverage we would otherwise be blind to.
All right. In the chat, I see some people are winging it. I respect that. You got to start somewhere. We've got some NIST.
Yeah, totally get it, man. Like, look, you gotta, we're like right now we got some good best practices or some common things that we can do that we know we should do, and we do those things. But it is always helpful, not to use it as a rigid thing that you have to abide by to the letter, but just kind of looking at the general controls and understanding what should I be doing, and I know I'm kind of doing some of these things, and what do I need to do? And then those are my gap fillers and things that I need to go work on. So good stuff though. But everybody appreciate your honesty. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I'm going to go into a little bit about Mac OS security. Some of this you may already know, some of it might be new to you. Um, but kind of give you an overview of what macOS offers just out of the box before you have any MDM or anything like that on it. First, there is a lot built into the hardware itself, right? You have Secure Enclave. This is something that you'll hear Apple talk about a lot at all of their major events, is the power of Secure Enclave. And this is a processor that's built into the Apple device that manages all of your encryption keys and all of your Touch ID, Face ID, all of your passwords. Basically, any sensitive information is separated and stored in the secure enclave. This is that data lock that happens. Something that if you have an iPhone, for example, if you restart your phone and try to unlock it, notice your Face ID or your Touch ID, depending on what device you have, won't work. You have to enter in your biometrics, and part of that is the secure enclave kicking in. It exists on all Apple devices, not just Mac OS. Making sure that that is locked until somebody enters in a known passcode. Um, it also stops you from connecting to certain Wi-Fi networks and stuff like that. There's a lot of things that are restricted after a reboot, for better or for worse, depending on the what's happening on the device. They're also for Mac OS with the introduction from Apple Silicon, and this also applies to iPads, which are now using those M series chips. So you'll either hear it called Apple Silicon or the M chips. Was introduced by Apple a few years ago now, and that has a lot of additional security that the previous Intel chips didn't have. It was designed by Apple and hugely powerful, but they have dedicated security processors that provide a hardware level root of trust for secure boot and all of the encryption stuff and the core system processes. So the device that you're on already has hardware bound encryption and security tools in it. If you're not using Apple Silicon devices, just know that macOS 26, coming out this fall, is the last Mac OS that will support Intel chips. So it is something to keep in mind as you look across your Apple fleet. After hardware, there's also system security. SIP, you'll hear people talk about SIP, System Integrity Protection. This is something that prevents unauthorized apps, even me as root, from modifying key system files and processes. So there's certain parts of Mac OS that are locked away behind SIP. And every new Mac OS is putting more and more core processes and system files behind it. So that means even if I have admin access, I still can't go and do certain things like remove an MDM profile that's non-removable. Disabling SIP is a whole process and very difficult to do, and every year gets harder and harder. Um, there's also notarization. Every Mac app, even those downloaded outside the App Store, must be notarized by Apple to verify that they're free of malware. This is a process every app developer will need to go through, and Mac OS will not let you download and install an app that is not notarized. You have to jump through a lot of hoops to do that. And that is kind of a stamp from Apple saying, yep, this is good. There's no known malware on it. And of course, FileVault, been around for many, many, many years. This is a full disk encryption. So even if my computer is stolen, if they don't have, if I have FileVault enabled, and they don't have a FileVault password with a secure token, then they're not getting my data. The only thing they can do with that computer is wipe it. So if you have Mac OS in your environment, there is, or even if you're using it personally, whether it's at work or personal, FileVault is a very easy to enable first line of defense for any computer theft. It's tried and trusted over many years. And there's also built-in malware and threat protection. People don't really realize that Mac OS comes with some basic threat protection from Gatekeeper. You may have seen this in your system settings as you're trying to install an app that may be unauthorized. You can control and say, I only want apps installed from the App Store or to allow some apps downloaded from the internet. Um, Changing these settings does require an admin credential. And XProtect is a built-in antivirus that scans for known malware. Um, it's one of those lesser known parts of Mac OS, but still pretty powerful and a good first line of defense as well. There's also network and privacy controls. There is a firewall that is built into Mac OS. You can do an application level firewall. You can, if you have that enabled, it's all in the systems, it's built in to block unauthorized network connections. And there's also transparency, consent, and control, TCC. What you will see this, you may not know what's called TCC, but especially on the more recent Mac OS, it's those prompts that you're getting. Hey, Zoom wants to have access to your camera, to have access to your mic, to have access to your location. All of those prompts, access to your files, everything on Tahoe. There's even more on macOS 26. Apple is very, very, very concerned and wants their end user to know exactly what processes are happening on your Mac OS and what processes they're using. You'll see this too with different things will light up if you're sharing a screen or if something's using your microphone. If you're at a lock screen and your screen is being observed, it will say that, hey, something is looking in. Um, they want to make sure there's full transparency and full power to opt in or opt out. You can say, as I frequently do to Brave browser, no, I don't want you to use my location. Why do you need it? Um, and I use it sometimes where I forget maybe my camera is on for another app that's still using it. So these are things that you may have seen just as end users, and they're things that you can control with an MDM for certain workplace applications. Like, yes, I do want to just grant and not prompt my end users constantly for some things. But that's TCC. And Mac OS, they have all of these things built in. It's awesome. It's a very secure operating system. Apple really prides itself on its privacy and security. Every Apple webinar or Apple News thing will underline that. But even with the most secure operating system in the whole world, there's always the weakest link in the chain is the human factor. People are easily influenced, and even if you have the most secure operating system, if you have people using it, there's going to be a abilities to, yeah, exactly what is in the chat. There's going to be ways for people to get in and get around it. I won't repeat what's in the chat, but you know what I'm talking about. So they're social engineering attacks, right? These are like the psychological tricks that people use to get you to give the password or the fake alerts. I feel like every week I'm getting a text message or something saying I have a fast pass fine to pay in a city I've never been to. These are sent out in mass. There's also phishing. This is something that uses the emails and text messages, same thing, pretending to be from a trusted source, USPS cannot deliver a package or customs being held. These are things that I get pretty regularly. It could be emails of people trying to pretend that they're Apple and you've had a breach in your iCloud account or something like that. Um, they can get pretty sophisticated and get you to click on a malicious link and enter in your credentials, which are then stolen. And there's impersonation. So this is when somebody's posing as an IT help desk, a management or a family member. I deal with these regularly with my grandparents who always receive phone calls of people pretending to be us, her grandchildren, in need of help or in need of things like her social security number. Uh, these are easy ways, and no matter how good you think you are at spotting these, um, the more advanced they get and the better they get over time, it's easy to fall into a trap. Just because you think you're the most secure doesn't mean that you might not fall into this, and then you'll be compromised. So kind of an overview of what operating systems are in the workplace. And this would be actually interesting in the chat if y'all could talk about the iTunes gift cards. That's a good one. In the chat, if you let us know kind of what your environment looks like. A lot of people have pretty mixed environments. From Windows, there's about, and these are kind of rough estimates, and these are with a North America focus, so these might change depending on your region, but about 63% of the North American world is using Windows, and there's a reason for this. It's the standard, has been the standard for many, many, many years. A lot of legacy applications can only run on Windows. As someone who is a Mac user and a Apple household, I every now and then run into an issue where I need to find someone with a Windows computer because the application won't run on it. And the compliance frameworks are pretty well thought out and created for Windows, right? This has been around for the longest. Um, and it's the only thing some companies will allow. Uh, for Mac OS, this is actually growing year over year. Now it's about 24%. So it is rapid growth, and its growth is being contributed to user choice. More and more workplaces are allowing people to choose what devices they get. Do you want a Windows machine or do you want an Apple device? You want a Mac OS? And 72% of people, when given the choice, will choose an Apple computer because it's fancy, it's cool, it has a nice UI. Personally, for me, I will always choose an Apple computer, and that's because I don't know what I would do with a Windows machine. It's been that long since I've used one. Part of that growth too is within tech and the creative sectors, especially. And there is a little bit of a Linux footprint out there, mostly for development, infrastructure. Technical teams will still be using Linux. Um, it's a great operating system. And if anyone's doing math, I know this doesn't go up to 100%, and that's because there are other OSs out there. But what I really wanted to highlight is Mac OS is growing, and that means that it is now under threat. I feel like for a long time, Apple was always like, well, there's not enough of us, so there's no malware, there's no, viruses. That's a Windows thing, and that is not true. So we have another poll. But before this one, what were actually the poll results from? I don't know if that popped up, if I could see the results. But at the very least, I can see we've got people with a mix of Mac OS and Windows. Nice. I like to see 60% Mac OS become the majority. So this is the next poll. Are you currently using any tools or solutions to manage or control administrator privileges for your Mac users? And yeah, how many Mac users are admins, right?
That was the first one. There's a
Yes.
there's a quick question from Brad as well in the Q&A. I'll just answer that while we're
Mhm.
watching our poll here. So to get auto elevate on iOS, do we have to join Addigy or can we manually install it? So this particular relationship is for Mac OS, and nothing for iPhones, iPads, or any of the iOS devices. But to get elevation and control for Mac, it's just auto elevate. You know, Addigy if you want to do the RMM portion for your Mac environment, but you could just get us for the Mac elevation portion if you wish.
Yeah. To touch on for your iOS devices, Addigy can enforce certain compliance standards to make sure your devices are fitting those standards through MDM. Usually it's just installing different MDM profiles to allow or disallow some things. All right. I am gonna move on and Bill will talk about the threat landscape in Windows.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, Brad, we have a package for Datto that you can use. There's a bunch of commands and stuff like that that you can use to deploy the Mac agent. So let's talk a little bit about the threat landscape overall. So we talked about all the different layers of security that are available in Mac. Unfortunately, not so many of those exist for Windows. And there's a lot of potential threats that are out there. So just a couple things like that common stuff that we kind of see all the time. is things like Mimikatz for credential exfil, DC sync, Kerberosing, again, try to gain credentials, using PS exec to take stolen credentials to move laterally throughout organizations, doing living off the land style attacks. If you're not familiar with living off the land, it's essentially using Windows scripts and binaries against you. These are legitimate programs that exist in the operating system that take advantage of privilege. You'll notice that there's some highlighted red text on the screen. Almost everything, the prime objective is getting access to privilege escalation and credentials. That is the primary focus. Windows functions in one of two ways. You are either a standard user of the standard user token, or you're an administrator and you can do everything. So I can do nothing, I can do everything. There's really no in between with Windows. And so the goal is always, I need to get access to credentials. And you can kind of see that, by just the types of attacks that are out there. So let's go to the next slide too. So some of the other stuff too that we'll see commonly, and then of course you have your traditional attacks, and you'll notice that all of these things all focus on getting access to credentials or brute forcing credentials. So the idea is gaining access and using um, credentials is the prime objective of pretty much almost everything out there. In order for it to reach its objective and be successful, it has to get access to some type of a privilege escalation. So that's the goal of today is to talk about how we can potentially put together a security strategy that allows us to do a better job of stopping a lot of these things much higher in the security stack before they have a chance to really infiltrate our environments.
And for those who think that these are just Windows problems, I'm going to kind of give you a very similar looking slide with stuff that is specific to Mac OS. Just in 2024 alone, there were 22 new malware families that were discovered. So this is a growing threat, and year on year, it's going to continue to get larger, especially as that Mac OS footprint spreads wider. Some of the credential and privilege attacks that exist out there is Mac Stealer. It harvests passwords, your iCloud keychain data, browser cookies, documents, credit card information, they're going in. This is an app that goes in and tries to get as much information as possible before leaving. Amos, Atomic macOS Stealer. You'll usually see this one around. This is one that's been making a big splash. And this uses AppleScript to extract passwords, files, keychain contents, all of the same stuff as before. And this is a good way of social engineering, right? The end users are going to see something pop up that looks like an Apple prompt. So why should, I should trust it, right? I'll just enter my password in this random thing that is asking for information. And similar to Windows, there is ways to compromise, just native parts of Mac OS. So like instead of living off the land, it's called living off the orchard binaries, Lubins. Stealing SSH keys, reusing it, ARD, Apple Remote desktop abuse, remote scripting, using TCC. So if you remember, those are those prompts, giving access to maybe screen sharing or camera access from a malicious app so it can tap in whenever it wants. You can have launch daemons or agents to have kind of a persistent and quiet foothold on the device. There's a lot that can happen with just a single point of, failure. Once they get into the device and get those credentials, they're going to try to grab as much as they can, and if possible, stay on the device for as long as possible. There are, like I said, 22 new macOS malware families that just came up last year. A good security researcher to follow is Patrick Wardle, who is one of the leaders, I think, in macOS malware and security and documenting these things. That was his findings last year. Some new malware that came out of it was not Lockbit. Like this is macOS tailored ransomware that doubles as a stealer. So not only is it going to lock and encrypt it and hold all of your stuff for ransom, it's also going to scrape as much information as possible. And Evil Quest is the same, right? It's targeting credentials and encrypting your files, and just exporting all that it can. And those classic credential hacks, they still apply to Apple. It really is, a lot of people think it won't apply. Apple's the most secure. And yeah, it is a secure operating system. But all it takes is influencing one human to allow access to something that maybe they shouldn't have. I
All
don't know,
right,
Pat.
so let's talk about the overall process of how these things get implemented, where they start, how they get implemented, and ultimately, this is called the kill chain. Probably a bunch of you have seen this before, but it's just a good reminder that it starts in the reconnaissance area for a lot of these people, and this is something I think it's too often ignored. A lot of people still have the wrong idea about what that part actually means and who is actually doing it. So the key thing with this is a lot of people have especially those that are not well versed in cybersecurity, especially when we have to explain it to people who aren't necessarily well versed in cybersecurity, they have this perception of what a hacker is, right? And it's, they have this perception of it's the guy in the hoodie with the 9 monitors on the wall and the matrix codes running down the screen, and they're just sitting there just going crazy trying to hack everybody's computer in the world. And realistically, that could not be farther from the truth. There are so many, it's so easy to get and subscribe to malware frameworks, ransomware frameworks that are already pre-built. And really, to be fair, and I hate to say it, what you really got to be worried about is probably your neighbor, right? It's probably that little dude, the 17-year-old, really smart, computer kid who's been poking around the dark web. He's got an email list with 2 billion names and addresses on it. He's got access to a ransomware as a service or malware as a service framework. And all he has to do is put together his little phishing expedition. So at that point now, once he's figured all that out, he's already made his way through the recon area. He's weaponized it. He's figured out what's the exploit that I'm going to target and what payload am I going to deliver. And there's a bunch of payloads out there, right? Delivery systems, so Metasploit, TrickBot, Ematep. There's a whole pile of them. So then now we get to the actual exploitation part. That is where we exploit that vulnerability, right? So how do I deliver it? Is it going to be an email? I don't know. I can't even tell you guys like this year alone, how many guns I've bought, how many McAfee subscriptions I've renewed, how many what was the latest one? There was something else. My Office 365 subscription from some, person's email address. So like I get these every single day trying to get me to visit a website, click on an invoice, go to a DocuSign, go to a Dropbox sign, whatever, go to PandaDocs to and try to give people access. And the key thing that makes this work is that way too many people are either A, still running as administrators, or are still using secondary administrator accounts or shared administrator accounts so that credentials can be harvested. And then we can move on to the really, really bad part of the kill chain, which is installation of whatever malicious item that they want to put in there, getting what's called command and control or C2. And then ultimately, we call it hands-on objective. A lot of times it's actually not a person on a keyboard. It's usually them exfilling data out and things like that. So a good example of this mess that happened recently, if you've seen the Reddit thread, where an MSP technician, full admin, right? I know we're not, we always say we aren't, yeah, the UPS techs, I love those. And the US Post Office, those are great too. But like we always think that us as technicians, we're infallible, we're super smart, nobody can outsmart us, and we do let our egos get in the way. So a good example of the kill chain that just happened recently was Venom Rat, and it got an MSP technician. They had exploited a vulnerability, they put together a good package, and ultimately what it was, they were going to they told him, click the link in the email to download the cache of the new JFK files that have just been declassified. And us IT folks, when it comes to like government secrets and tinfoil hat stuff, we are all in. And that's what he did. He clicked on it. He was running as full administrator, which is something you're not supposed to be doing. And it downloaded a bunch of VHD files, which they assume were for data exfiltration, HVNC for command and control, and pastebin for keylogging. So that's a good example. And he didn't even know it was there. Somebody else found it. So as much as you think that it won't happen to you, it can. And the primary driver of success for almost all of these things comes down to easy access to credentials, and we just make it way too easy. All right, let's go to the next slide.
All right. So just a little bit on password hygiene. Um, we all know we're guilty of this. I work in IT and I definitely have reused passwords. So there's like 19 billion passwords available on the dark web, right? And that number grows. I feel like every data breach I see in the news, it's not just, hundreds, it's millions of passwords are being stolen daily. If you haven't signed up to things like Have I Been Pwned, right? That will let you know if your data has been part of these data breaches. But in those 19 billion passwords, 94% of those have been reused or duplicated. Only 6% are unique. And I'm not saying, you may be thinking you're using a unique password if you just add one. Oh, okay, that one expired. Now I'm going to do password two, or add an exclamation point. That those are easy things to guess. In the workplace, 47% of employees reuse passwords at work, either very often or frequently. Um, it's easy to do, and it's a bad habit to get in. With Oh, and then not only do you have reused passwords, you have recycled passwords, and you have a lot of these just like really easy to guess predictability of passwords, which means you're a lot easier to hack. Trust no one is obviously the most secure password that anyone could use. If you use an at symbol instead of an A, obviously that's gonna save you. I am joking. Please do not do that. Don't quote me on that, just in case we weren't all clear that that was sarcasm. So we all know passwords are being reused and easy to guess.
Don't note to self, don't use patterns, curses. Use your password generation stuff, folks. So I want to kind of just this is more of an awareness type thing for everybody to realize the severity of the gravity of the situation. Upwards of almost 90% or more. They don't have an exact number. A lot of people will say that it's somewhere between 80 and 90%, and some of the other ones will say it could even exceed 90% of breaches that occur. So actual, whether it's malware events or, installing software that we don't want, malicious software, adware, spyware, most things actually aren't ransomware. Ransomware is only about 5% of the overall attacks that are out there, mainly because they're a lot more difficult to execute because you have to have privilege, right? Can't encrypt the drive without it. Not easily anyways. I'm sure somebody in the world figured out a way. But the majority of things are like stealers, droppers, loggers, stuff like that. Clipboard snoopers, all kinds of stuff. Here's a little scary thought. What is the first thing? So all of you guys like, Brad, that's a great password. I love that, right? But nobody wants to type that out. So what is the first thing? And a fake Scooby biscuit for the first person who answered. When you have complex passwords and you need to use those passwords, um, what is the first thing you do when you go to use that password? Even from your password manager. Somebody's got to answer this. Copy and paste. You got it. Hey, you know what's not encrypted? Your clipboard. So anybody with a stealer or a keylogger or a clipboard snooper, all they have to do is just wait for you to copy and paste something somewhere at some point, and then they've got you. And then that's why because it's so easy when you have admin accounts active and available and you have that level of access, it's so easy. It makes sense that 90% of breaches are some level, I don't want to say abusive privilege, like they hacked your account. They just waited for you to do something simple and then they stole it, right? And that's what we're talking about. Is just people have way too much access. The follow on to that is about 80% or more of breaches are linked to like password. And most of the time it's somebody stole password. So, for example, I talked to an MSP at a show where one of his customers, the CT CFO, got hacked. They got access to their Azure tenant, spun up a $500,000 worth of virtual machines to run a Bitcoin mining for the operation for the month. So they got a bill for $500,000 from Microsoft. And obviously somebody called and said, "Hey, what are we supposed to do with this?" And I'm sure you can guess what Microsoft said, right? Pay it. Microsoft didn't care. They're like, you gotta pay the bill. Like you use the resources, you pay the bill. How you lost the control of those resources is not our problem. That's your problem, right? And so that's a wake up call. Not everybody can suffer through a $500,000 of losses, right? Especially small to medium businesses. So it is something that we hope never happens to us, but there are things that we do that just make it way too easy for them to get at us.
So
All
that brings
right.
us to this. Yeah, zero trust privilege access.
So we've been telling you all of that to talk about this, right? What we talk about is or what we're calling next gen privilege access management. So in the traditional sense of privilege access management, we had some things like doing make sure we're doing password vaulting, make sure we're doing password rotation, using things like lapse accounts and stuff like that to try to make it more secure. We want to we want to take Pam to the next level. And some of those next level processes are um, trying to do away with always on access. Because that's exactly what, like, if you go back and look at that threat board that we put up earlier with all those threats on it, tools like Kerber roasting and DC syncs and Mimikatz and stuff like that, those are all designed to get credentials. So what we're trying to do is how can I deny all of those people trying to exploit my environment? How can I deny them the one thing they want more than anything? And ideally, that would be I would go with zero standing privilege. I would go with removing always on accounts. And I know what you're going to say. That's great. What about me? I have to do work. I've got to admin machines. I've got to install and remove software. I have to change settings. What about me? Just remember, if it's good for you, it's good for them too, usually. And that's what we're trying to get at with next gen privilege management is moving you guys towards more zero standing privilege. I don't want to have always on accounts. I don't want to share accounts. Shared accounts are evil, right? Like, I mean, think about it. If you compromise one, you have access to everybody. You not have only the keys to your castle, you have the keys to every castle. What you want to do is make it extremely difficult for them to move around laterally. You also want to make it noisy. You want them to be noisy in what they're doing. You want them to have to repeat these things over and over and over again, because that's going to lead into your defensive in-depth strategy that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But you want to move towards zero standing privilege. You want to eliminate the use or need for administrator accounts altogether. You want to start looking at how can I do more just-in-time work, where those ephemeral accounts are created and deleted, so they're just a pop-up in time. Much harder to play whack-a-mole. And then something else you may or may not heard of, something like just-in-time privilege or just enough privilege. What we want to do is give you just enough privilege, ideally, to do what you need to do in every sense that we can when we can. And ultimately, what that leads us to doing is denying access to the thing that they really, 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 really want the most, right? It allows me as the IT security person to get rid of those standing administrators, get rid of shared access, get rid of shared passwords, get rid of shared password vaults for admin accounts, eliminate rotations because I don't have admin accounts hanging around anyways. So that takes a lot of work off me right there. But I also now I can control access. Those are things that are really critically important to me, and that's what Next Gen PAM is designed to do. Let's go to the next slide. So this is what we call we call this, so we call this internally the circle of defense, but it's basically talking about a defense in depth strategy. So all of those things that we've talked about on the slides before us kind of boils down to this, is building in defensive layers and building in a level of proactive and preventative measures that you can implement to stop a lot of these threat vectors that are out there from drilling down into the core of what would be sometimes a very, very thin security strategy. So starting with, like, having those layers up at the top, if you notice where those attack vectors are coming in, it's all focused on those outer layers of what we have. And we can use those proactive layers of security and those preventative measures like blocklisting for living off the land attacks, doing a good job of PAM, doing a better job with our passwords, putting in simple spam and DNS filters, which probably most of us already have already. But what it does allow us to do is build in multiple layers of defenses. You don't want to build a moat around the house to protect it, the castle to protect it, but then not put up any walls, right? You want to have multiple layers of defenses for them to have to ultimately get through, and ideally to be very noisy to get through. Otherwise, let's go to the next slide. Otherwise, what happens is if we are not focused on putting those proactive measures in place, doing a better job of controlling privilege, doing a better job with denying access to the thing they want most, if we're still allowing people to have admin, if we're still not, enforcing password management tools across our user base or our customer base, and if we're not focused on, those denial of credentials and denial of access to privilege escalation, then ultimately those layers kind of collapse and disappear. It puts a tremendous amount of downward pressure on a very small, very thin security stack. And you've gone from tranches of protection to simply, I've got, sure, I put AV on everything. That's good enough, right? Or I've got EDR in place. That's good enough, right? That'll do everything for that I needed to do. And unfortunately, it's just not true. Like, a lot of things weren't designed, EDRs and AVs and things like that. They have their strengths, but they also have very big weaknesses. And so people are very adept and very good at getting around those. Living off the land, and for Mac and Windows, for example, really plays havoc with AVs and EDRs because you're using legit signed scripts and binaries. Um, yeah, so it's crazy. Cool. Oh, we get to do a demo. This is gonna be fun. Um, let's pray it all works. Fingers crossed,
It,
everybody.
I want to
Fingers.
make sure everyone knows this is a live demo. So,
Well, it's as live as we can make it.
yeah.
The live demo. All right, all right, all right. Oh, look at that. Windows is already disconnected. We got to get back in.
Well, while you're doing that, I have the poll results. So the first one is what percentage of your Mac users are running as admin? 50% of you said 76 to 100%. So a lot of people here have majority admin users on their Mac OS.
Wow, and that is what, look, that's what they're hoping for. They're hoping that we're a little bit lax in our security, or that, they understand our methods. If you think about it, you're kind of backed into a corner right now. And let me share my screen as well. There we go. And we'll share that one. So we're kind of backed into a corner. They know how we have to operate. They know that one of two things is going to be true. Either you're going to be an admin, or the person who's on that computer they're attacking is going to be an administrator, or they know there's probably some secondary account that's out there that more than likely has been used, and I can just focus on compromising both of the one or two of those particular avenues, right? Those threat vectors. And so, because they know how we operate, I mean, if you think about it, what other choice do you really have? That's why PAM is so important. Having a method to both remove administrator access and at the same time deny them access to any accounts because they just simply do not exist. But you can still do elevations. So let's take a look at that. So I'm on a Mac up in the cloud right now, and I'm going to try to make a change. Let's go do an installation. So I'm going to try to install some software. Oh, my security settings won't let me do it. Oh, well, that sucks. All right, let me do this. I'll just ask my folks over there at Auto Elevate if they could grant me some access so that I can do this. So need to install this agent package. So I'll send that request off to those guys. Let's see what happens. So now that we've done that part, let's take a look over here. And now we've got a new user actually requesting an elevated session. This person, as you can see, is not an administrator right now. So we're going to take a look at that. What are they trying to do? Install a new agent package. We know who it is and where they're from. It's like, all right, I'm pretty cool with that. Let's go ahead. We'll just give them a quick 10 minutes. Grant them some access really quick. There we go. We are recording all of this as well, so we know who's approving and who's saying yes, who's saying no. And then ultimately we'll pop back over here. Now temp admin has been granted. So now I can go and work on changing the settings that I want to change to give me access to what I want. So let's go down to privacy and security. And let's go change this to App Store known developers. Oh, got to put in my password. You know these complex passwords. And Apple's smart. You know what they don't let you do? Copy and paste. I got to give them credit for that. All right, let's make sure I topped it right. Boom. All right, that worked. So now I've got my update. I can run my installer and set up my package. It's going to allow me to go ahead and now run my installation. So we got access. We're a full administrator. Now that I'm all done, and I'm not going to run the installer, but now that we're all done, we can simply come back and just say, hey, I'm all finished. Let's go ahead and cancel. We'll end our session right now. There we go. And my admin privileges have basically ended. It's gone and removed my administrator access, so I no longer have access to do all the fancy things I would love to do, but I am not allowed to do. So that's on the Mac OS side, right? Just showing a simple request. Since we do have a bunch of folks that do have Windows in the lobby as well, including some of those folks who said us Mac users are very stubborn. Yes, we are. So let's take a look at it from the Windows side, all right? It's a very similar process. So I'm just going to ask for some access. So we'll ask for something like Command or PowerShell or something like that. So let's run that as an administrator. And again, we're going to see in the case of Windows, of course, we got to deal with a little different security mechanism. We have to deal with UAC. So what I've done is I've essentially interrupted UAC. I've kind of dismissed it, pushed it off, and said, "Hey, you go chill out in the corner, and then let me find out from the important folks if you're actually allowed to do something like this." So we'll just say, "Need to mess with Windows." That's probably not going to go well. So we'll send that into the console. Hang tight. We're going to route that over live. You notice these are all happening live too. So, and these do also, by the way, they do pop up on your mobile phone. So let's go take a look at that new request that just popped in. There's our Windows guy right there. What's everybody trying to do? Ooh, no, I don't like that. We were nice to the Mac people, but the Windows folks, we're just going to say no. We'll say okay. And then when we take a look back over here, we can see in this case, we've got our access denial. We're not allowed to actually do that. So, and there's no administrator accounts available on any of these machines. We're really focused on providing and allowing just-in-time access. So in the case of the Mac OS environment, there's some, we won't give you the secret sauce, but the permissions are granted on the back end, and then as soon as you're done, permissions are immediately removed. The same basic principle happens in a Windows environment where we grant you permissions on the inside, let you do what you need to do for just what you need to do it for, and then we immediately remove those permissions. And so when we go back to a normal environment, there are no always on, no active administrative accounts, so I don't have to mess with a lot of the other stuff about who does somebody know the password, how many people have it, all that jazzy stuff. And if you want to see more, let us know. We can do a full demonstration of all the capabilities. We just wanted to give you an idea of what some of that stuff looks like. Back to you, Selena.
All right. Too many screens. You should see the slides again.
You do.
Great. So, kind of what you just saw. There's some key benefits here. We've got cross-platform privilege management. So if you are a mixed environment, which I feel like everyone on this call is, this is a way to kind of unify it, more efficient, saves you time, and you have the security without compromise. So that way, as Bill was saying, you're eliminating standing admin rights without introducing that friction, right? End users will still be able to do what they need to do, but you'll be able to see why and control that.
Yeah, that's always a challenge, right? So we struggle if IT security people had their way, we would clamp down on everything, but that would make the end user experience absolutely miserable, right? And it's we have to balance out our need for security and the level of security we want with the level of productivity, end user experience, and ultimately happiness of our end users or our customers that we have to balance that on a fine edge. And so having the ability to do this and answer those, because if you think about it today, your only method for doing these is either give them administrator or they have to call you. I have to log into their screen. I've got to put my credentials in. And if you think about that from an end user perspective, it's maddening, right? It's like my God, you just made me sit here. I asked an MSP yesterday what their SLA was. They were like 48 hours. I'm like, really? If I have if I'm trying to update QuickBooks, I have to wait potentially 2 days for you to contact me to put a freaking password in. Oh no, cuz you're gonna fix that right now. I'm not gonna do that. So things like this allow us to provide that level of security we want, but the level of end user experience that our customer expects.
And with that, I'm going to go to the final poll. If you'd like to know more, this is it. Let us know. And I do know from that second poll question, 71% of you are not using any tools for privilege access management. So that's something to keep in mind as we go to the Q&A. So let's take a look.
Let me go see. Let me see. Will RMM tools like Automate be able to install Auto Elevate on the Macs like we can on the Windows side? Yes, there is package instructions and scripting and things like that, so not a problem. Um, would Brad has a question. Would ZSP affect the system account that RMMs rely on? No. So there's two layers of Windows security. You have the desktop context layer in a Windows environment. It's a little different in Mac, but in a Windows environment, you have the desktop layer of security, and that is protected by UAC. Then you have what's called system or NT system authority, local system account, stuff like that, LSA. So LSA and system accounts, they can do whatever they want. They have no restrictions whatsoever. However, in order to get a service installed that's allowed to run under system, you have to go through privilege. You have to go through UAC, which is why it's so important that you have a method to protect that. UAC is ultimately the function or the thing you have to get by, but the implication of what it's controlling and what you're saving is much, much, much bigger than that. But yeah, it doesn't affect that. Your RMM was given privilege to install. Now it's running a system. It can do whatever it wants. Colin, do we get a log of all the things that user changed since the Windows side is run on a per process basis? You do, and we're working on it in enhancing the Mac agent. This is our first iteration. It's going to be available for GA in August. But the right now the logging for that is in a file in the directory, which is in our documentation. On the Windows side, yes, everything is logged, and our goal is to get the Mac side to parity with Windows. So we know at least on the Windows side today, we know what computer you were on. We know what process you tried to elevate. We know who was on the computer with you, who you were logged in, what system you were on, where you're located, what process you tried to elevate, what time you tried to do it. And if a rule was applied to it, it wasn't applied, or it was a request and it was approved or denied. So yeah, everything is audited, and our goal is to ultimately get Mac to that level of auditing as well. Jeremy, how would this work in a help desk environment? Does it create a ticket? Yeah, so we have a number of help desk integrations that will allow us to create tickets in things like Dado PSA, Autotask, ConnectWise, Halo PSA, Synchro, and there's a couple of others that are out there. And if not, we can always do an email connector. If you give us an email address, we can email a ticket when a request comes in. Is there a shortcut on the macOS version to display the QR code for text? Not yet. We gotta do the session for the moment, but that is on the radar as well to take advantage of more of the Mac security tools that are native in the macOS environment. All right, Brad. In my AE environment of several companies, global rules, would you have to readjust these to meet Macs? No, because rules are not applying to Macs right now. It's just session-based elevation. So at the moment, that doesn't apply. Once we get rules applicable for Macs, then it will, but it's still going to rely very similarly. The underlying function of that is still going to be hashes and certificates and stuff like that. So it shouldn't have too big of an impact when it is ready. Yeah, no whitelisting yet for Mac. It's still just sessions based. So we got all those. If we're using CyberFOX AE for Windows, do we need to do anything new to use it on Mac OS or just another seat? It would be just another seat, Brian. So all you got to do is when it's available in GA, we're going to enable it in your console. And then in the settings screen where you can download the Windows agent, there'll be a new link below it that says download for Mac OS, and it'll be a package. So you can do DMGs, I think, or PKGs. And then on our website, we have a bunch of scripts for deployment and methods for deploying Mac out as well. Do, 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 do. Is Addigy going to make this one of their built-in software packages? Selena, do you have an answer for that one?
If you're an Addigy customer, you'll have some of this access built into our software. If you are not an Addigy customer, then CyberFOX is your place to go to get the PKG to deploy it with whatever MDM that you are using.
Awesome. When is the other way going to be refreshed? And it's yeah, it you one of the things, Jonathan, I'll say, so the question is when's the web UI going to be refreshed? So we built the web UI around grid views, and grid views behave a little bit like Excel. One of the things that I encourage everybody to do, and once you start to really understand how the best way to operate a grid view is by grouping and subgrouping and then saving views, I always try to tell people, use those grid views to create actionable intel. You can also move the columns around and hide columns you don't want so that only the information you want to see is available so that you don't have to scroll left or right. But getting really, really good with grid views can help you create actionable views that allow you to log into the application and go, oh, I know what the state I want the system to be in. So I'm going to build these data views that show me the state, the current state, so I know exactly what I need to correct. So when it isn't the state that I want it to be in or I desire it to be in, I easily have those views to tell me exactly what I need to go do to get it into a desired state, right? Whether that's creating views around the different agent modes, creating views around how events are coming in, creating views around how rules are displayed. Once you really get the use and the hang of grouping with grid views and then saving and customizing, they're incredibly powerful. Do 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 do. ServiceNow ticketing? Not yet. Sorry, Dave. You can do
And
email ServiceNow.
Brad, I see you're requesting a demo. I am not actually sure what our normal turnaround is, as I'm on the product side of the house, but I can follow up with them and make sure that somebody reaches out to you very soon.
Awesome. I think that was, thank you guys for all of the interactions and talking with us today and chatting and asking questions. We really appreciate that a ton. And we really want to say thank you for taking time out of your really, really busy day, because we know how busy you all are, to come and hang out with us and talk about this. So thank you so much from us folks at CyberFox.
And thanks from the Addigy side. This is recorded, and I believe it will be sent out in sometime in the near future. I'm not gonna, as a product manager, I'm never gonna commit to a timeline. But in case you missed it or you wanted to go back and relook at the slides, that should be coming. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, girls. Appreciate you.